Hey friends, welcome back and happy 2021. This is our first episode in the new year. I'm Emily. I'm DIY My Way over on Instagram. And today, instead of telling you what I'm wearing, what I'm working on, I actually want to talk about something a little bigger. I ended up changing my episode kind of last minute this week because, everything was going great this week and I had all these plans and it's kind of a big week for me. And then Wednesday happened, January 6th, if you're watching this further in advance. And as I watched that news footage, I just couldn't stop thinking about the difference in the way the protesters that then turned into a mob when they reached the Capitol this week were treated and were policed versus the way the Black Lives Matter protesters were treated and policed. And it really, I was with the Black Lives Matter protesters. Let me make that very clear on how I feel about this. But what really struck me about it was how police treat people so differently. And they make assumptions of people and their threat levels and all of these things so differently. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, it happens on both sides of it. Police take crimes and media takes crimes so much more seriously when it's a white person, particularly a white woman. That's privilege, and I don't think that's okay. So this is the first case I've covered here where there's kind of a cause behind it. Today's case is unsolved. It's actually not even open. And I'm going to tell you all of the reasons that the police should have at least looked into this further than just ruling it a suicide at first glance. Today, we're going to be covering the case of Joseph Smedley at IU in 2015. I did just want to say I am linking in my description box the change.org petition to reopen this case and the GoFundMe to help the family pay for an attorney and a private investigator to help understand what really happened on September 27th of 2015, which I'm going to tell you what we know so far. I definitely encourage you guys, as you listen to this, if you feel that there's a reason to believe it may not be suicide, to go and at least sign the petition, donate if you're able. Okay, and let's jump in. So Joseph Smedley, he was born in 1995 to Dr. Joseph and Lori Smedley. His parents were together until he was around 11 years old, and then they were divorced. His father did remarry, and he was in his father's custody, but he and his stepmom just did not get along. Oil and water. So he lived with his dad until he was 17, when he chose to move out and was actually legally emancipated from his father. He moved in with a family that lived nearby that he was really close with, and that was actually the last time that his father ever saw him. So he did stay in school. He graduated in 2014 and went to IU to study biochemistry with pre-pharmacy declared. So he had a long educational trajectory in his future and was honestly super excited about it. As a freshman, he did very well. He was in a lot of those freshman weed out classes and was pulling A's and B's in fall semester. In spring semester, he chose to rush Sigma Pi fraternity, which is not Sigma Chi, Sigma Pi. And he got very involved with his fraternity. He just loved his fraternity brothers, spent a ton of time with them, did a lot of fraternity events. It was really the experience you really want when you go through recruitment, right? So fall semester of his sophomore year, he was living with a couple of brothers from the fraternity, still working really hard in school, doing a lot of events with the fraternity. Life was pretty good. And September 27th, 2015 started just like every other day for him. He got dinner a little before 8 p.m. from Noodles and Company that night. And then, according to his roommates, they watched a movie and a baseball game before stepping outside around 11 p.m. to see what was called the blood moon. The blood moon was an eclipse that was happening, or a lunar eclipse that was happening that night, where basically the eclipse was in such a way that it would cause the moon to turn red. It's a super cool and kind of rare lunar thing, I guess. So they said they stepped outside around 11 p.m. to see that, and then around 11:30, they all went to their own rooms to go to bed. And again, this is according to his roommates. So he allegedly goes to bed around 11:30 p.m. His sister, Vivian, wakes up the next morning to a text that came in from him at 4:15 a.m. And it's kind of strange. It says, "Viv, I love you. I'm leaving the country. By not telling you why, I'm keeping you safe and protected. Please don't try to contact me at this number. It won't work. I'll contact you once I'm set up overseas. Thank you for everything. I love you, and I'm sorry." And she says years later, she wishes she could have looked at it and known that something was wrong, but when she saw it, she literally responded, "LOL, shut up." Because it was so out of character for him, and she thought he was just joking around. They joked around all the time. She says he didn't even have a passport. So she said she had texted him back, "LOL, shut up, and then don't forget to pay your apartment rent." She was a co-signer on his apartment because he didn't have a relationship with either of his parents, we assume at this point. I've never seen mention of his mother in this stuff, but he definitely did not have a relationship with his father. But so she had co-signed on his apartment, and she had gotten notice that he hadn't paid his rent. So she reminds him to pay his rent and goes about her day. She notices towards the end of the day that she never really got a response from him, and she's thinking like, okay, that text was weird. She texts him again to remind him, and still nothing. So she feels like she's just overreacting. You never want to assume that something bad has happened to you. That happens to other people. That happens in true crime videos you watch on YouTube, right? So she calls the campus police because IU has their own little police department. A lot of like bigger colleges and universities do. So she calls them and just asks them to do a welfare check. She's like, "Hey, I got a weird text from my brother and I haven't heard from him for a while. Like, can you go check on him?" They say, "Sure." Cool. Now at this same time, so same day, September 28th, we're going to rewind back a little bit. His roommates had gotten up and gone about their day like normal. There really wasn't anything unusual that they noticed, but it was also really normal for them not to see Joseph in the mornings. Joseph had earlier classes in the day than his roommates did, so he was very often up and out the door before they even woke up in the morning. And they didn't expect to see him that day until they got to chapter, which is a fraternity meeting that night. So that evening, they got to the chapter and no Joseph. That was the first warning sign that his roommates had that something might be wrong. So they're a little concerned, wondering where he's at, because this was super unlike him. And all of his fraternity brothers would say that, since he had joined, he was really involved in Sigma Pi. So they go home and they figure, maybe he took a nap after class and just didn't wake up, or maybe something's wrong. I don't know, but they went into his bedroom to check. So in his bedroom, they did not find him. But what they did find was a notebook sitting on his bed that had a note written on it. It was kind of scrawled across the page, and what it said was, quote, "Had to leave country. Don't try to contact me via cell. It won't work. Will contact you once set up overseas." And then it was signed Smedley 9/28. So there's a few things about this note that raise eyebrows for a lot of people that have looked at it. And a lot of this is coming from internet theories and things that were not published in news media. And that's because the news media really didn't cover this case. So a lot of what I do have to go off of is based on resources that his family has compiled. So just prefacing it with that. But the writing in the note, it had a few markers that matched his handwriting, like someone had tried to mimic his handwriting, but it really wasn't like his handwriting in other handwriting samples. An independent handwriting expert looked at it and was able to say that much. It also was noted that it looked more like writing that was written by a person who was left-handed, based on the way the writing curved. So a person who's right-handed will tend to write and kind of curve up. This writing curved down, which is a left-handed thing because of the way your arm moves. Based on that, they said it's very likely that it was written by a person who was left-handed, and there was no reason for Joseph to write this with his left hand. The writing also was scrawly. It was you know, had a bunch of misspellings, grammatical errors, things scribbled out, and that just really was not how Joseph would have written. He was very neat. You know, in every other page of the notebook that he had written on, writing was on the lines, it was very clean, and this just seemed different. People also have questioned a lot how he signed the note. And I have a take on this, but I'll tell you what they think first. So he'd signed the note Smedley. The only people who called Joseph just by his last name, Smedley, were his frat brothers. So a lot of people say, why would he have signed a note that, you know, he went by Joseph to his professors, things like that. But it seems normal to me that you would sign a note like written to your roommates who are your frat brothers and probably call you by this name with this name. I don't think that's as weird as people think it is. I think it's more of a red herring. The date part does raise an eyebrow to me though. So the fact that he put the date at the end of the note instead of in the top corner was odd. Maybe that's just a me thing. The second is why you would date it 9/28 instead of 9/27. The third is, you know, why would you put a date on a note like that? If you're leaving the country, like, do you want them to know? I don't know. It feels fishy. The whole note just feels fishy to me. This whole story does. And the other thing that's really odd about this is when you look at it in context, in context with the text messages that he sent to his sister, because the message is the same in the two notes. You know, leaving the country, cell phone's not going to work, I'll contact you once I'm set up. But the context, or I guess like the sentence structure, the grammar, the use of pronouns versus not, the offering up an explanation is very different. You know, when he reaches out to his sister, he uses pronouns, he says he loves her, he gives some vague context about, like, you know, by not telling you, I'm keeping you safe. In the note that he leaves for his roommates, there's no pronouns, or like mention of arrangements or anything. You know, it was towards the end of the month, we know he hadn't paid his rent, so there's not even mention of rent money to these people that he's splitting rent with. So a lot of people look at this and speculate that the two notes were written by different people. It was basically like they decided on a story, but for whatever reason, someone was in his bedroom arranging it to look a certain way or taking things or whatever it may have been and left that note, and someone else had his phone and sent the text to his sister, basically so that people wouldn't think that he was missing. There is no proof of this. But it is speculation. It is something that would be discovered if the investigation was reopened. These two things that were going on, Vivian contacting the police, not being able to get a hold of him, roommates, doesn't show up at chapter, they find his note, they happened in parallel. So right around this time that the roommates are finding the note, the police come to do a welfare check. And the roommates are like, oh, perfect, yeah, he's not here. We can't find him. So they went in and did a quick search of the apartment. They went into his bedroom, and his roommates would later say, you know, they didn't really spend a lot of time there. They felt that the police could have spent more time looking into, like, is there evidence of foul play? What's missing? What's not missing? You know, they never really even noted many things that were missing that they would find later with his body. Spoiler alert, he was killed. But those things weren't noted as being missing from his room. The only thing that police really did was they came in and they took his computer. And then the police, at some point after this happens, they call Vivian and they tell her, guess what? We found him. So she's like, okay, this is great. Like, where was he? And they said, well, he's actually being held in jail at another police station that's like a county over from us. Vivian was kind of shocked to hear this. He'd never had issues with this kind of stuff, but she's like, okay, you know, whatever he did, I love him. We're going to get him out of this. And she calls that county, and they've never heard of him. They don't have anyone in custody by his name. They've got nothing. So she calls the Bloomington police back, or the IU police that she'd called, and they're like, and she says, you know, he's not there, but they insist that he is. they're like, we looked at the record, he's found, he's there, and she described it as like they clearly didn't want to talk to her anymore because they thought they had done their job, they had found him, it was done. And she calls the county back again and confirms, and I cannot even imagine how frustrated she must have felt in that moment. Her little brother's missing, she's basically the only adult or guardian in his life, and the police are basically like, one saying he's definitely there, the other saying he's definitely not, and neither of them are listening to her. So she and her husband decided, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to go to Bloomington ourselves and look around and see if we can find him or see if we can put pressure on the police to find him. Now, the police did eventually figure out the mistake that they had made. It wasn't as clear to me when this happened, but they eventually did call her back and say, we've realized we made a mistake. They mixed up names. So they didn't say what exactly was the issue with the name and like how they had mixed up the names. If it was like, oh, there was a guy named Joseph and so we assumed, or there was somebody who fit his description, or whatever it would have been. At first I found this really fishy and was like, is the police department trying to cover something up? But then the more I thought about it, I said, maybe it's not fishy. Maybe it's just lazy or a sign that the police really weren't taking this seriously, which I find extremely disappointing in this case. And maybe is part of the reason why they don't want to open the investigation, but I don't know. Again, I'm speculating a lot more this week than I usually do, and I apologize for that. Okay. So Vivian and her husband get to his house and asked his roommates if they could look around. His roommates say, of course. They let them in, and Vivian and her husband, they go into his bedroom to look and see, maybe they would notice something that the police didn't in the few minutes they spent in there. And what they find is there are several checks. We assume they're uncashed just based on the description that I've seen of these checks, but several checks from his summer job. He worked at like a moving company and like helped people like move stuff. But it was odd to Vivian and to other people to know that there were several checks that were likely uncashed because they weren't signed in his bedroom because Joseph was struggling with money at the time. He also had the check that he was supposed to use to pay rent, which was the thing that Vivian was reminding him of when she didn't hear back from him. So they found that. And in his closet, there was this box. The box was typically where Joseph kept this bottle of scotch that he had. It's kind of unclear like what the story behind the scotch is or how he got it. Some people said, oh, it was from his parents, but he doesn't have a relationship with his parents. So that's a little bit of a question mark. But he had this bottle of scotch and he loved it. He was really into the fact that he was saving this bottle to open when he got married. It was a really big deal for him. But that he wouldn't open it until then, and he was really steadfast on that, is what people said. But the bottle was missing from the box, and instead there was a note that read, quote, "Will return Joseph Smedley." And I only found text that described this. I didn't see a picture of the note, so I don't know if it was "Will return," signed Joseph Smedley, or if it was "Will return Joseph Smedley." I don't know how it was phrased. I only ever saw the text that was on it. I also don't know if it matched his handwriting or not. That was not something that I could find. But people have speculated on what this note means. Some say, this is him saying he's going to return. That maybe he took the bottle and went out to party or drink it and said, I'm coming back, just not right away. Others say maybe someone took the bottle and said they would return it for whatever reason. I, again, could go down a rabbit hole and speculate on this, but the reality is I don't know how Joseph and his frat brothers handled alcohol, especially expensive alcohol and special occasion alcohol. So the one thing that I will call out as weird is, if it was a frat brother, which a lot of people have said it could be, why would they have written Joseph Smedley instead of Smedley, which is what they called him? And if it was Joseph, why would he have written his full name on a note that was in a box in his closet just for himself? So that was weird. And that's a question mark for me that I don't understand. So really, this evidence and the things that his sister found when searching his room was all they had or knew about his disappearance for the majority of this week that he was missing for. Because 5 days later, on Friday, October 2nd, Joseph's body was found. It was reported by canoers actually at this place called Griffey Lake. Griffey Lake is about 3 miles away from IU's campus. It's a pretty popular spot, especially during that time of year. It would stay open until the end of October, but people would go out to the lake and canoe and just like get away from campus and studying for a little while. But like I said, it stays open till the end of the month. And the canoers that found him said the classic thing that everybody says of, we didn't think it was real, we thought it was a mannequin. Like, y'all, when is it ever a mannequin? It's not. Spoiler alert. But they found it, they called it in and reported it around 7 p.m. that day. So Bloomington police come out to help retrieve the body from the lake, along with a variety of items that were with his body. Joseph was found fully clothed. He had a pair of binoculars around his neck. He had his backpack, but instead of being on his back like you would typically wear a backpack, it was strapped to his chest, kind of like on the front of him. And they even found his wallet in his pocket. So at no point did they believe that his death may have been a robbery. I wasn't able to find, if things were missing out of his wallet. But I do know that his bank account and his, that information, or that was never used after his death. So it wasn't like somebody had stolen a card from him. So inside of the backpack, they opened it up and found his school papers, or some of them, an external hard drive, his phone charger, and 66 pounds of rock. Yup. 66 pounds of rocks, presumably put into the backpack, and the backpack strapped to his chest to hold him down. The water that he was found in was really, it wasn't that deep at all. Reports that I saw said the water in that lake is really only 3 feet deep. So this was water that you could kneel in and still be above water. So something really must have forced him down in order for him to have drowned in this water. Especially because his sister says Joseph was a strong swimmer. So unfortunately, the Bloomington police didn't look at this like it was potentially a crime scene. They actually put all of the evidence that was recovered at the scene into the body bag with his body, and just sent it all to the coroner in the body bag, which is not normal. That's not what you're supposed to do. So they threw all the evidence in the bag. He goes to the coroner, or his body goes to the coroner, and the coroner immediately determines that the cause of death was drowning. If you're not an absolute true crime nut, then you may not know the difference between cause of death and manner of death. But cause of death is pretty straightforward. It is what caused you to die. What was the thing that caused your heart to stop beating, or, caused the person to lose their life. Manner of death refers to the situation that is surrounding the person's death, generally found by other evidence and situational clues that can be found in the autopsy. So for example, a person's cause of death could be strangulation, but the manner of death could be suicide. They could have tried to hang themselves, not died immediately. That's strangulation. It also could be homicide, where someone strangled them. The way that you would be able to tell the difference is by looking for things like defensive wounds. What type of marks were around the neck? Was there anything else? How long did it take the individual to die? Things like that, right? Those type of indicators will tell them hey, this might have been a homicide, or this was a homicide. And that helps inform the police on how to proceed with an investigation. So, long-winded explanation to tell you that in this case, the manner of death was not initially published. I don't know if in that initial autopsy they had one. Realistically, not a lot of documentation has been released about this case. But about 2 months later, the coroner would rule, or it would be reported that the coroner ruled the manner of death as a suicide. So Vivian just could not believe this when it happened. She said, there's absolutely no way. And I mean, that is a response that happens from families with suicide, but she really does have a point here. But there was also something else that just like really was strange in this, and really indicates that this may not have been suicide. So this thing was actually Joseph's Twitter bio. It read, it started pretty typical. It read, IU undergraduate, biochemistry, pre-farm. But then it goes on to say, quote, if found dead in police custody, it wasn't suicide. And I don't want peaceful protests. End quote. His account was active up until the day that he disappeared. So I guess the question is, was this an indicator of fear that he put this in his bio? And if so, was it driven by something specific? Was it a more general fear, or could it have been a sign of underlying mental illness and a paranoia of sorts? But here's the thing. Joseph Smedley was a Black man living in the Midwest. And I know the South has a pretty big reputation for being racist, but in the Midwest, and I am from the Midwest, so these things I'm saying, these are things I've seen as well as read about, you know. In the Midwest, especially college campuses, they are very predominantly white. In fact, at IU at the time, the student body was around 4% Black. That's it. And the graduation rates of Black students were about 10 percentage points, or close to 15% lower than the average graduation rates for the college, or for like the university. The other thing that's important to keep in mind as we talk about this is some of the outlook or the context surrounding this semester for him. At the University of Cincinnati, which is pretty close, but over the summer at the University of Cincinnati, the university police department there had shot and killed a Black man named Sam DuBose. You may or may not have heard about Sam DuBose. I encourage you to look it up if you haven't, because basically what happened was the officer, he was a campus police officer, he pulled Sam over for a very minor offense of not having his front license plate on his car. Sam DuBose was pulled over for that, and at some point in this interaction, the officer felt threatened by him, pulled the gun, shot him. There was an independent investigation, and a lot of different things happened, but it took months for this to be resolved. And it took months, like the officer was placed on administrative leave right away, but it took months for him to be fired and this to be settled in court and all of these things. And so being a Black student on campus, especially in that area in fall of 2015, was challenging. You know, racial issues on campus that fall were being brought up more than they had been previously. I could only imagine how scary it was to be a Black student on campus. I mean, actually, I couldn't imagine how scary it was to be a Black student on campus that fall. And so part of me wonders if that's part of why, or if that's why he had that in his bio, or if, you know, he and his friends were assuming or had experienced something that led him to put that there. That, you know, the police do treat Black people and Black men differently. But I've gone off on a tangent again, but I think it's an important one. And I also want to say that that whole tangent that I went on is not unbased. It's not a baseless tangent. I'm not just over here shitting on the IU police department with no reason. You know, first of all, Joseph was reported missing on the evening of September 28th, but IU students, like the student body, was not notified that there was a student missing until just less than an hour before his body was reported found on October 2nd. So he was reported missing for 4 days, actually missing for 5 days before anyone was even told to, hey, keep an eye out for him. This is dramatically different than other cases of missing students at IU. The example I'll use here is Lauren Spearer. If you are from the Midwest, you probably have heard of her. She went missing from IU's campus a few years before Joseph Smedley did. And it was a night out. She was partying, left her friend's house at 4 o'clock in the morning, never seen again. But her disappearance was almost immediately broadcast to the entire campus. Within hours, everyone's out looking for her. Like, that is the right response to a missing student. Like, let me be clear. I'm not saying that's not what should happen, but that didn't happen for Joseph. You know, people didn't even know that he was missing or that they should keep an eye out for him. He may have been seen in that week and no one knew. It was unfortunate, and unfortunately, it was only the beginning of the issues with this investigation. So initially, the IU police had the investigation. The Bloomington police had come in to help recover the body, but IU was investigating it. And they began to slowly piece together some of Joseph's last movements. They were working pretty closely with his sister Vivian. And it was slow going, and they had some pretty serious errors. The biggest one being that they mishandled some evidence. They found his cell phone. It was not reported to be found with the body. It was found later or recovered later, but they don't know where it was found, which is very fishy. And I don't know if it's like it mishandled, wasn't written down with the body, but it was actually found with the body, or if it was found somewhere else. His phone was kind of all over the place, as we later discovered that night it was kind of all over the place. And so we don't know where it was found, which is concerning. But they just don't know. Before the IU police were even able to finish the investigation or their investigation or anything they were working on, the Bloomington Police Department took over. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 months after his death that they did this. And when they did, the coroner declared the manner of death as suicide almost immediately. It was the same coroner that had done the autopsy, but they released this to the media, tragic death due to suicide. They also, at this point, would work only with Joseph's father. If you remember back to the beginning of the story, Joseph's father had not actually seen him since he was 17 years old, and he moved out and was legally emancipated from him. He was estranged. The two did not have a relationship at all, but the Bloomington Police Department to this day won't work with Vivian. Ultimately, a timeline is put together. This timeline I got from his sister Vivian in the Justice for Joseph Facebook page. So this is, I believe, based on information that she got from the police, information she got from his friends, and just other bits of information that have come together over the years to kind of help piece this together. So he was last seen on Sunday, September 27th, between 11 and 11:30 p.m. Police do believe that he was at Griffey Lake when he was last seen, and that he had gone up there potentially with his roommates or with other fraternity brothers to see the blood moon. The blood moon did peak that night between 10:11 p.m. and 11:23 p.m. So 11 p.m. would have been a good time to see it. I did see in some places that his phone may have pinged at Griffey Lake at this time, like that he received a text message and caused it, phone pinged the tower. I wasn't able to find this in more than one place, and it wasn't in the official timeline that I saw. So I don't know if that's for sure. But because of that, and because he was found with binoculars, the police do believe that he was out to see the blood moon that night. Again, his roommates claim that that's not the case, that they walked outside of their apartment or their house around 11, just like right outside to see the blood moon, and then went back in, and that he went to bed in his bedroom at 11:30 p.m. I was not able to find anything on why his roommate's story doesn't line up with what his phone records say. So that's a question mark. But his phone was not used between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. But at 4 a.m., when he sent that text message to his sister, his phone pings at the intersection of 7th Street and Walnut Street, which you guys you have no idea what that is. But essentially, that is about 17 blocks from his apartment. The way it's set up, and I'm going to stop knitting for a minute to talk to you with my hands. So campus is here. He kind of lived down on this side of campus, like down here. His fraternity house was up here. Griffey Lake is 3 miles that direction. And then downtown Bloomington is over here. I wish I had drawn this out for you. But so he essentially like walked from his apartment right along the edge of campus into downtown Bloomington, or that's how you would get there to where his phone pinged at 4:15 a.m. downtown Bloomington. Which is kind of like, it's right near college. There's a lot of bars, restaurants, like shop, that type of a thing. So that's where he's at in downtown Bloomington at 4:15 a.m. or that's where his phone is. At 4:45 a.m., his phone pings again, this time very close to Griffey Lake. So in 30 minutes, the phone has traveled 3 miles. And so now he's gone from allegedly being at his apartment down here, across over here, and now he's all the way up there, 3 miles north, up there. The next time it pings is at 6:30 a.m., so almost 2 hours later. And this time, it's closer to where it had pinged at 4:45 a.m. It's actually near or on a major road that's called Old State Route 37. It kind of runs along the side of campus through downtown Bloomington up to Griffey Lake, and then it curls up away from campus kind of into like a woodsy looking area. I say that having driven on it into campus. I've actually been there. It's kind of weird. But so that's where his phone pings again at 6:30 a.m. And then at that point, his phone powered down. We don't know if someone turned his phone off, if the phone died, if the phone went into the water. Because they don't know where the phone was found. We're probably never going to know that unless they, can look at it and say there's water damage. But even still, we don't know. We're not going to know where it was found. So you look at this, and especially that jump of over 3 miles in 30 minutes, and it kind of seems like at 4 a.m. he's driving all over campus. So investigators of some sort found his car. It was where he typically parked it, and said that the car actually was inoperable. It didn't work. So how would he be driving all over Bloomington at 4 a.m.? He had to have been with somebody, right? Because even if he had taken an Uber, it would have charged a card. And it's really hard to find an Uber at 4 a.m. And where was he for those 5 hours that were unaccounted? We know very little about where he was, what his state was that night, anything like that, And I mean, all of these questions I have, I'm sure Vivian has them times 100. And so after all of this, she had way more questions than answers. She truly, in her heart, did not believe that this was suicide. There had to be someone else involved. Someone drove him around. Potentially someone else wrote one of the 2 notes. And so she looked at all of this, and she hired a third-party forensic pathologist to do a second autopsy. That second autopsy has been done, but not formally completed, because the police won't cooperate with them to finalize it, I guess. That's my understanding of it from what's in the GoFundMe page. But the forensic pathologist was able to get access to his body and do the second autopsy. In this autopsy, the forensic pathologist did agree that the cause of death was drowning. However, this person found some hemorrhaging. They found this hemorrhaging on his back. And it was described as being consistent with being held down, which would make sense if you were drowned in 3 feet of water. that you would have to be held down, right? So based on this and based on other defensive wounds and things that they found and the way his body was found, they ruled that the manner of death could not be suicide. Because this forensic pathologist has not had access to the evidence that the police have, they cannot rule what they do believe the manner of death is, but they've said that it was not suicide. Like something else was going on, they just can't look at the evidence, which is a part of this, right? And the reason that they can't look at it is that the Bloomington Police Department refuses to work with Vivian, or the forensic pathologist that she's hired to complete this autopsy. They won't speak to her. They will not meet with her. They're super uncooperative with it. And this is not normal. Like, it's absolutely not normal. It is not uncommon, especially in suicide cases, but just in general, that the family disagrees with the findings of the autopsy. They hire a third party, they have a second autopsy done. If you follow true crime, you've probably heard that narrative before, right? It's so uncommon for a police department to refuse to allow the third party to have access to the evidence. That's absurd that this is going on. So that's all I have. That's all the family has. It's been over 5 years since Joseph died, and there's never been an investigation into if it was anything other than a suicide with a lot of unknowns. Like I said at the beginning, this is the first case that I've done here where we can actually do something about it. Vivian has the petition that I mentioned before to reopen Joseph's case. That's all it is, for the police to reopen it, to let the forensic pathologist meet with them, finalize that second autopsy, and then look at maybe investigating this case as something, because she firmly believes this is a case and that her brother did not take his own life. And honestly, like, looking at all of the evidence, going through the timelines and all this stuff, I'm with her. I cannot see how the pings of his phone and all of these things would have worked without someone else being involved. I also have a lot of questions about his roommates. Like, why does their story not line up with what his cell phone pings say, and why has no one ever asked them that? I'm very confused. And then they also have the GoFundMe page, which in order to subpoena records from the police department, they need an attorney. Over the years, Vivian has worked with several attorneys who have offered to do it pro bono and backed out at different points in it, and has gotten to the point where basically she wants to be able to hire someone to ensure that they see it through. She's had people drop on her the day before the hearing or get spooked for one reason or another, which I don't understand. I'm wondering if there's other things in this that maybe we don't know, and there probably are. There's a lot of things in this we don't know. But she would like to be able to hire an attorney to help subpoena this paperwork to complete the autopsy, and also to hire a private investigator so that they can have someone investigate this case that, you know, they feel confident cares about it. So I have already signed the change.org petition. I encourage you to do the same. If you're able to give to the GoFundMe, I've also included that link below. But guys, these things work. There have been cases that have been solved because public interest is on them, and they reopen them and they discover that what they thought for years was a suicide or an accidental death or just a mysterious death or things like that is not the case. And if that is the case here, and and Joseph was killed by someone or something else happened, then that person is free right now. And that's not cool. Public attention is how we get cases like this one solved. It's also how we bring awareness and ultimately change to the major difference in how police treat Black victims of crimes in this country. Thank you guys for listening to me. I know this is different than what my videos have looked like in the past. I think as I continue to look into these, I'll find kind of a medium between it. Maybe do a little less speculation than I did today, because I know I did a lot of speculation. I went deep on the Justice for Joseph Facebook page. And I feel pretty strongly about this one. I hope you do too. And I totally encourage you to check out that Facebook page. Super helpful. All right. I hope you guys have a great day. Stay safe. Who knows what the world's going to be like the next week. Feels like we're living like so much change all at once. But seriously, stay safe out there. Bye, guys.